Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news. The Bloomberg Businessweek podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec from Bloomberg Radio.
Now to someone who's also participating in the festival here, but first a little bit of setup. You might recall yesterday how we talked about how an estimated 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions are due to tourism, and that's predicted to double by 2050. It's the year that scientists have forecast as the tipping point for all sorts of ecological disasters. Worldwide aviation actually accounts for 2% of all carbon dioxide emissions and 12% of all CO2 emissions from transportation. So how can tourism and airplane travel fix its emissions problem? Some argue that the answer is 100% sustainable aviation fuel, and that'll play a big role. Curbing our long-haul international flights too will certainly be something that you have to keep an eye on as well. Our next guest thinks about this constantly. He's participating in a panel at the Bloomberg Green Festival about Fueling Airlines Decarbonization Journey. Pleased to welcome Ryan Spies. He's Managing Director of Sustainability at Alaska Airlines. He's here at the Bloomberg Green Festival in Seattle. Ryan, welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Okay, so sustainable aviation fuel. It kind of sounds too good to be true. What exactly is it? Because right now it's just a tiny portion of the fuel that airlines use.
Yeah, SAF or sustainable aviation fuel is, it can be almost like a miracle drug, but that doesn't exist in any quantities that we really need today. Sustainable aviation fuel can be made from things like fats and greases, oils. That's primarily what we're seeing today. But the next generation of those things is really where the fun science comes into play and where the carbon emissions comes down quite a bit.
Is it always made of byproducts, or are there certain crops that could be grown just for producing this fuel?
So we haven't seen any crops grown directly for producing it. You're usually using byproducts, but the future technologies is actually all about pulling CO2 out of the air and transforming that with renewable energy and renewable hydrogen into jet fuel. It's something that can be dropped right into planes today, which is really exciting, right? You're not worried about taking the farm and making it into fuel.
Okay, I mentioned it's just a drop in the bucket right now.
Right.
The aviation fuel management software provider i6 Group says that only 0.1% of all jet fuel that's used worldwide is sustainable aviation fuel, and that has remained level in the last 4 years.
That number is definitely growing. It's certainly, we're seeing about 1% right now. And we're actually having demand much more every day. And so what we're seeing and what the challenge is how do you scale up an industry that is 3 to 4 times more expensive than the industry that exists today? And so, we're thinking about technologies and investments, and where can we as an airline, which doesn't have incredibly robust margins, spend our dollar wisely and spend the dollar of our guests wisely so that we're making the right choice for them, but also the planet. Really challenging.
So 1 gallon of sustainable aviation fuel is literally 3 to 4 times more expensive than a gallon of conventional?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, where are you getting it right now?
So primarily we're getting it out of a group in Montana that's doing fats, oils, and esters, and we're sending that to our Los Angeles airport and San Francisco airport.
How do you bring these costs down?
It's a great question. One is investment, but really the idea here today is finding great partners. So innovation happens in a lot of places, and that's why the Bloomberg Green Fest being here is an amazing opportunity to meet with our partners, folks like Microsoft, folks like Amazon, that have a vested interest in how do they bring their emissions down when they're traveling with their employees. And so finding those partnerships to help us offset that green premium is part of it. It's the deal with any scaling operation, right? How do we get more? We need to induce more demand, and we need to kind of keep that train rolling and having partners that help us along the way.
But are you just able to induce that demand by getting large corporate customers to pay more?
No, and that's actually a really exciting thing that Alaska has done. So we've engaged our guests on this journey as well. Back in December, we offered a promotion that if you bought sustainable aviation fuel with us, you got some elite qualifying miles. We sold over 500,000 gallons of SAF in December alone. In May of this year, we just offered that to our guests to do it in the bypass. So the first US company to do that, where when you're buying your ticket, if you want to offset a piece of your flight, 5, 10, 20%, you can do that. You can help contribute, and every sort of piece helps. That's not the only thing as well, right? It's not just how do I get a guest to help me pay for this, or how do I find a corporate to help me balance this. It's also thinking about policy. Policy is incredibly important, and one that we've seen on the federal level with the Inflation Reduction Act has certainly helped. We want to take that a step further. We see credits expiring. How do we extend those? So there's so many levers that we need to be really engaged with, and at Alaska we are.
Does the lever need to be pulled by the government, by governments outside of the U.S. as well as by governments in the U.S.?
You're seeing both, right? So in Europe, it's much more of a stick approach, right? Mandates on percentages of SAF that you have to use. That's just sort of come into place, so we'll see how that market develops. Obviously, we're a much more carrot-focused market here in the U.S., and so you see incentives for building, you see incentives for delivering. And those are a different approach, and we're both going to see how this plays out. But I think both are really important, and so it's exciting to see how this industry will grow in the next
You
years.
sometimes hear terminology that doesn't exactly match what people think it means. So
Sure.
when you talk about sustainable aviation fuel, is it actually sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the life cycle, the science is certainly there behind it, but the challenge is not all SAF is equal, right? Each one might have a different carbon content or a life cycle carbon emissions associated with it. And so explaining that level of detail is challenging. We're always trying to think about it, not in just dollar per gallon, but dollar per ton. How much does it cost to reduce a ton of CO2? And we're thinking about that number, and that's what our guests are thinking about, and that's what our corporate clients are thinking about.
So what's the byproduct that's created when an engine burns sustainable aviation fuel?
It is CO2, so it's still burning it. The thing about sustainable aviation fuel is you're looking at the entire life cycle of how the fuel is actually made, right? Whether you're pulling fossil fuels out of the ground, which is traditional jet fuel, or you're using some lower carbon material in the production and process and transportation of that fuel. So at the end of the day, you're still burning some CO2, but if you look at the full life cycle, much reduced with SAF.
So how much does it decrease the carbon output of a traditional flight if it's still emitting CO2?
Yeah, so you're looking at, with SAF today, about a 40% reduction if you're putting that in a plane in the total life cycle. Our hope is to get up to 80 or 100% with the e-fuels that we talked about earlier.
Is this the only part of the solution when it comes to
It is. It
the
is
impact that airlines have on the climate?
I would say it's the short and medium term solution for many flights and the long term solution for long haul flights. We believe in battery technology, but we believe that there's an opportunity for hydrogen to play a part. But those things don't scale quite at the same rate. If you think about flying from here in Seattle to New York, by the time you land today, or if you took that flight, the weight of the aircraft has gone down tremendously. If you do that with batteries, it's still the same weight. So you're really fundamentally fighting against something that's physics. And so we think that for those short and medium haul flights, new technologies will absolutely start to take hold. SAF will be there for the long term.
What about hydrogen?
We made an investment and actually donated a plane to Zero Avia, so they're looking at...
Yeah, we're joined by the CEO and founder later on the program.
Yeah, it's super exciting and an incredible talk. I know that we're all anxiously waiting for. That's a technology where we think, hey, there's some promise here. There's still a lot of infrastructure challenges with hydrogen. There's still a lot of, how do I get that to my airport? But we are investing and encouraged by it. But we'll see where it plays out.
Not to mention the production of the actual hydrogen, and it can be energy intensive too.
Very energy intensive, but that's the case with all these fuels at this point, right? And so we're encouraged by renewable energy, obviously dominating every new piece of energy that's going in the market, and that would help on the hydrogen side as well.
So right now, if you look at the fuel usage of Alaska Airlines, what portion is sustainable aviation fuel?
We are about 1%, and like most airlines here in the U.S., our goal is by 2030 to hit a 10% goal. It will be a challenge without all of those levers pulled at the same time.
Is it a realistic goal?
I think it is. I think the challenge is today, right? So we're speaking on stage with John from Sky Energy and Microsoft on how do we get this plant built. So I think that there are absolutely opportunities to get us there. Not going to say it's going to be easy.
It's also, if you think about the sustainability element, you said you have a facility in Montana that you work with, and then you have to get that fuel then to the West Coast.
Yeah.
That's not exactly, carbon neutral.
Right. The infrastructure challenge is its own beast, especially here in the Pacific Northwest. We have some real challenges with getting SAF into SeaTac. So how do we solve those? Working with policymakers, working with partners, working with traditional oil and gas to solve some of those challenges. But yeah, most people don't ask where they're getting their jet fuel from in the start. So.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. Do you think that we'll start to see traditional energy companies that make conventional aviation fuel get into this market?
I think they've dabbled. I think they're a bit waiting on the sidelines to see, is the demand really there?
Is it?
Yeah.
It sounds like it is, because if the goal is 10% by 2030, then the demand is there.
The demand is, the intention is there, right? But the demand to pay for it is still developing, right? And I think that'll be the biggest challenge. And honestly, if you're looking at the oil and gas markets, they're worried about their margins too. So they're doing what they need to do.
Well, one of our Bloomberg Intelligence commodities analysts, Mike McClone, always says the cure for high prices is high prices. So if you have something that's high priced, you get more people coming into that market. It's just basic economics, right? Do we get to a point where you get so many people coming into the market because they see demand for it that you see price to fall in the coming years?
Absolutely, and that's where I think engaging our guests and engaging corporates and telling those stories about the demand that we have will encourage and will, hopefully incent production in the places that we need it the most.
Ryan Spies, Managing Director of Sustainability at Alaska Airlines, here from the Bloomberg Green Festival in Seattle. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us
Thank
on
you
Business
so much.
Week. Really do appreciate it.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Business Week podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Well, you know how the saying goes, this person needs no introduction, and it certainly stands true for our next guest. We are going to give her an introduction anyway, though. Gina McCarthy is a former US EPA administrator under President Obama and the first White House National Climate Advisor appointed by President Biden. Gina is managing co-chair of the America is All In Coalition. It's a coalition of leaders assembled in support of climate action here in the United States, which is also led and supported by Michael Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Gina, also an operating advisor at Pegasus Capital Advisors and a senior advisor at TPG Rise Climate Fund. There's a lot more, but we'd run out of time if I read it all. Bottom line, she knows a ton about energy and climate change. She's with us here in Seattle at the Bloomberg Green Festival. Gina, how are you?
Great. How about yourself?
We're doing well. Welcome to the
busy
program.
Place. It looks like
is.
It's a buzz.
Hey, the energy's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
What's the most
important?
important?
As long as it's clean.
Yeah, okay, there we go. I like that. What's the most important conversation today involving climate change?
Well, probably it begins with an admittance that we're not doing as well as we can and we've got to scale up. And I think that really then lends itself to talking a lot about partnerships. We have a lot of good companies that are here represented, but honestly, we need more partnerships both across the U.S. and internationally to really tackle this at the scale that it deserves.
What type of partnerships? Because I was just speaking with Ryan Spies over at Alaska Airlines, and they're really relying on corporate partners to drive the change in sustainable aviation fuel because it costs 3 to 4 times as much per gallon than conventional fuel. So he wants the companies to pay more because they want to travel sustainably for business. Is that the type of partnership you mean?
I think it is about public-private partnerships. So I mean, clearly the Inflation Reduction Act was an opportunity to give some public money to drive a whole lot more private investment. And we have to start thinking that way. I don't think it's either or. I actually think it's those partnerships that are going to drive this in a way that actually provides meaningful scaling of this opportunity, not just in the U.S., but globally.
Okay, where's the government involvement? You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes.
In your view, is that just the tip of the iceberg? Do we need more?
We saw immediately after that happened, we saw the EU start driving new changes in Germany. So it's begun to take off and people are realizing that it's a way for the public and private sector to really join together so that both of them can win. This is not about spending so much money in the private sector that you can't afford to do the deals. This is about how do we make these deals affordable by connecting public and private. But there's still a lot of opportunities for private companies to accelerate their markets, and they're going to take advantage of that, and we should let them.
You've worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations. Why and when did the idea of climate change become so political in your view?
It started off being pretty political because it took a whole lot longer time than it should have for us to recognize that this was a legitimate issue. And so now, of course, it still remains fairly political, but honestly, the politics starts to move out when you realize that the kind of technologies and opportunities we have today are going to make people's lives better. if it's going to keep us healthier, it's going to save us money, if it's going to create real jobs, which is what we're seeing today, the politics may still be there, but it doesn't have the punch it used to.
How much, speaking of politics, of America remains all in if it elects Trump in November, given his promises to eliminate what he calls the EV mandate, target offshore wind, and pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement?
Look, I have every expectation that what he said he's going to do, he's going to do. So that should give you your answer. I don't see the United States or globally the kind of progression we need on climate if we don't elect someone who understands climate and wants to move those issues forward.
In your view, that is not the former president?
That is correct.
I want to welcome in Carol Massar, who just came running from the green stage. Great panel.
Thank you very much, because I did not want to miss talking with you.
Oh, thank you.
And we were just talking with Kara Hurst over to Amazon and also Sue Bird of the WNBA, and just the importance of platforms. But I'm listening to you guys. First of all, pleasure to meet you.
You too.
About politics. Are you scared in terms of what might happen in November?
And I think everybody should, because what's at stake is not just climate, which is the existential challenge of our time, but it's fundamentally our democracy.
Well, and it's interesting that you talk about, because are you concerned from climate, first of all, that we would go off in a very different direction? We would be more isolated? Because climate obviously has no borders, right? So
yes.
Never before have we needed to work together with everybody.
You know, we were just talking about that. It's going to take public-private partnerships, and it's going to take the U.S. and the other developed world to start investing in the developing world if we want to make this work. And those investments can't be coal. They can't be more natural gas. They've got to be the shift to clean energy and transportation that we know we can do.
Well, it is interesting because we know the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Agreement under Donald Trump, then President Donald Trump. He threatened to do it again if he's elected in November. You have pointed to, though, in terms of climate progress that's made by states, by cities, like the local level. I think about, we're going to be talking with the mayor of Seattle.
Yes.
Like the local level really matters too.
You know, that's really what Bloomberg's America All In program is all about. And it's more than 5,000 people are joining together. And that's because subnational governments matter. If you remember when Trump was president before, the effort was to make sure that states and cities stood up and held the ground and kept moving forward. And that's exactly what happened. So we need to make sure that we're not going back again and revisiting that. We need to actually keep moving forward with all of the breadth of expertise and experience we now have that says that we can win this climate battle if we have the courage to stand up against folks that are deniers and start really supporting those folks who know what the future needs to be.
You were talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, the investment in clean tech manufacturing and clean energy projects under Biden, fed by the IRA. How much of that endures regardless of what happens at the polls in November? How durable is the investment that's been unleashed by the IRA and other policies that could be pared back if Trump wins the White House? Like, how vulnerable is it?
Yeah, when you look at the money, we're talking about something like $361 billion, right?
Right.
And this is just the start. This is a 10-year program. We just had our second birthday, I think.
Yeah.
So we have a long way to go. And we're talking about job growth that's in the plus 300,000 plus new jobs, right? These things matter to people. Human beings care about this. And so these are benefits that people can see and feel and taste. So that's why I believe will there be challenges? Absolutely. I expect that under a Republican administration, you're going to see lots of folks wanting to pull that out. You're already seeing bills in Congress being proposed to get rid of this and that. But when push comes to shove, we have more money going to Republican districts that are now building the manufacturing plants that they don't want to shut down. So if they want to go against their own constituents and their benefits, then more power to them if they want to risk it. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I think we're going to hold the fort. We'll lose some. There'll be challenges, I think, internationally,
right?
But not just pulling out of NATO even. But these are the things, the large things that we have to think about that could be at risk.
30 seconds, Gina.
Yes.
I'm thinking about everybody who's listening.
Yep.
What's the one thing every individual, take politics out, should be asking themselves when it comes to the climate environment?
What do they want as a future for their kids? What do they see right now as the challenges that they're facing? We can no longer hide from the climate impacts, but what we can do is grab a clean energy future for our kids. That's how we're all going to win.
It's certainly something we think about, right? You have young kids, I have a 21-year-old. We definitely think about it. Thank you so much and all the work that you've done. Really appreciate it. Gina McCarthy, I'm so glad I squeezed in on you.
We'd run out of time if I read all her titles and accolades.
It's really impressive, but it's why we wanted to talk to you. Gina
Former
McCarthy.
U.S. EPA Administrator under President Obama, the first White House National Climate Advisor appointed by President Biden. Once again, she's part of the coalition, co-chair of America's All-In Coalition, which is supported by Michael Bloomberg.
She knows something about the environment and climate change and all the work. We're just going to say that.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We are at the Bloomberg Green Festival live in Seattle. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. Now, we are here because of the city's impressive legacy of environmental leadership. They have had a focus on really building out a clean energy economy and really investing also in their communities, healthy, well-connected communities.
And yet, like other cities in the nation, it's struggled to come back after the pandemic. Earlier this year, Bloomberg News reporting that the daily worker foot traffic was at half of pre-pandemic levels and office vacancy rates nearing 30% thanks to a remote work world.
All right, well, joining us with more on the 18th most populous city in the United States and its citizens, and on the role really cities play when it comes to climate change and green policies, is Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell, live at the Bloomberg Green Festival. Thank you so much for finding time for us.
Thank you for having me.
And being part of this festival. You're just off a panel here at the Green Festival about the role of cities. We were just talking with Gina McCarthy about the importance of towns, cities, states playing climate change. Talk to us about your priorities when it comes to making your city greener.
Well, a few things. Number one is I think you've heard the cliche now, mayors get things done, and it's more than a cliche. It's actually how we are going to transform our climate battles, I believe. That we work with, for example, in our building emissions performance standard legislation that I proposed at the past, we look at our buildings, which is a high polluter. And we said we will reduce our carbon emissions by 27% by 2030. And this is at the same time we're trying to get better foot traffic down here, supporting small businesses. Amazon is based here, obviously, and the e-commerce has changed buying habits and where people go and live and play. And so at the same time, that is when you demonstrate your values. And so if we believe that this war against climate change is real, as we do, then this is the time to start staking out our play. And so I think cities are best positioned to do this. And I said earlier on the panel, I have one of the greenest, I think the greenest governor, and through Jay Inslee, in the country. And so we have a good ecosystem of climate warriors
That
here.
helps, right? Tremendously.
Absolutely, it helps. And so from a state law perspective, they could pass policy that makes sure we're all working in unison with each other. But cities have the flexibility to go even further, and so that's what we try to do here in everything that we do. Transportation, of course, we're doing some incredible things in transportation. So I think cities are the best position to get it done.
Let's talk about transportation. In the 2 days I've been here, I've taken the bus, the light rail, the monorail. It's been pretty great, but this is still a city where a lot of people say they need a car. How do you change that?
So I proposed a $1.55 billion levy, a transportation levy, to look at our whole ecosystem. And it's all about choice. And cars are getting smaller and they're becoming electrified, and so we don't have an anti-car campaign.
A lot of cars are getting bigger.
A lot of cars are getting, in
the U.S.
The Ford 150 is a
still
truck
like our
that's still, So if your point is we're still car dependent, certainly are. We're looking at decades and decades of a culture in a country that's built out of Michigan, and looking at what GM and other companies have built. These are legacy organizations. So there's an ecosystem, and I don't pit cars against bikes. There's literally hundreds of millions of dollars in here for everyone in terms of building protected bike lanes. A person 85 years old may not ride a bike. We lead with transit, we lead with safety, we lead with equity. So I think here in Seattle, we're demonstrating this car versus bikes war, if you will, that we do it in a very civilized way, realizing that there still may be single modes of transportation, i.e. cars. They could get smaller and they're electrified, but this fight against climate change should be a unifying element. I talk openly about race. I talk openly about socioeconomic differences, that when people are hungry and you're talking about saving the planet, can you get their attention? You can when you change the narrative for it being a unifying and uplifting fight against climate change, and that's working here in Seattle.
Mayor Harrell, let me ask you about that, because as a mayor, you've got to look at all of your citizens, and I too have walked around the city. I've walked down Pike Street. Your city's not alone in terms of dealing with homeless, a large homeless community. We see it certainly in New York City back home. I also think about office occupancies, right? People are staying home, they're working from home. Remote work is still a thing post-pandemic. Like New York and some other major cities, you have a lot of your office buildings that are vacant. How do you balance climate? I mean, that's our future, but how do you focus it against all of that too? That's pretty challenging.
It is very challenging. So the first question I think we try to answer is to get people downtown, as an example, if they're working from home, what drives people to downtown? There's certain things you cannot get through e-commerce. And again, we're the home to Amazon, so we support e-commerce. You can't get a beautiful art show or a beautiful song, or you can't buy that. And so we activate areas. You can't get daycare online, so to speak. And so we're looking at the new downtown, if you will.
Right.
Two things is it has to be activated that meets people's needs. And so you have a workforce that have young children, you should have daycare services, affordable daycare services in close proximity. People are very attached to their pets. So I asked the question, how many dog parks should we put around certain areas? Because with COVID, they got used to being around their pet all day.
Right.
These are real examples of how you could activate a downtown. More people are going to live downtown. I have about 100,000 people living downtown, right? So we're looking at, I passed legislation to convert.
What was it before the pandemic?
Oh, that number's been pretty consistent.
Okay.
These are residents. But what I did was I proposed legislation to convert office buildings to residential buildings, acceleration of permits, a lot of incentives to do that. Because we think more people will live downtown. You want to say something, Tim?
Yeah, I just want to jump in real quick because I want to talk about the equity part of this. Because Carol and I stayed downtown at a hotel, and we were actually told by the front desk working at the hotel, avoid part of 3rd Avenue when you're out there. I did go by it on the bus. At what point do we come back here? And the front desk manager no longer says to us, avoid this. And he was saying it because of people there using drugs, unhoused people, and I saw a large police presence as well. But how do you fix that?
So let's not dodge that topic. What's happening in this country with the introduction of fentanyl and opioid, it is killing our country. It is a health issue. I have zero desire just to arrest someone, they go in jail, they come right back, and they go right back to the spot. I have to make arrests. Of course, we will make arrests, and we are making arrests based on someone presents a threat of harm. The health system in our country is such that I don't have control over that. Most cities do not. A few cities, I think Berkeley has their own health department. It's usually run by what's called a continuum of care, which is a county. So money goes to the county. What COVID showed us is that cities could be more nimble. Monies went directly to the cities and they could get things done. So right now there's many mayors, including myself, looking at how do we restructure the health strategies in our cities, because you're right. People are dying. You could buy a fentanyl pill for 50 cents, and they're committing crimes to support their habit. And so right now, I mean, we've recovered. We've been doing some incredible work getting these people off the streets. Now, we have to openly, I think, redesign the system, and we have to we're a rich city. Let's just be, we're one of the wealthiest per capita cities. And when you don't have the proper safeguards for people falling through the cracks, that's what they will do. And that's what you're seeing is people that could not, in a meritocracy, could not find their way to success. And there could be a host of issues they're dealing with, whether it's mental illness and who knows what the challenges are. So we're going upstream. Mm-hmm. We now invest in pre-K, brain development between 0 and 4. We're looking at the middle schools and the high schools trying to find the triggers. But what you're seeing out here is the result of, again, a successful city, people falling through the cracks, and a broken down health system, and we're trying to implode that right now to get them the help they need and get them off the streets.
So if you could change one more thing that you think would get them off the streets, what would it be?
Well, I'd like to have the ability to control the health dollars to get them treatment. They are sick, and you don't arrest a sick person, you treat them and try to get them healthy. And realizing there are bad people as well, and so we're not afraid to make arrests to get the bad people off the streets. So if I had one thing to do would be to, and we're working on this, is to redesign the health strategies on these people you see dying on the streets.
You know what, housing is also part of this conversation. It's part of the sustainability conversation, it's part of the green conversation. The cost of housing here is astronomical, like in many parts of the country. What are you doing in terms of encouraging developers, working with developers to build affordable housing to house some of these folks?
Yeah, so I passed the largest housing levy last year in our country's history. It's $970 million. And in that, it's all about affordable housing. It's making sure that the teacher, the barista, the healthcare worker can live in the city. We create incentives through tax incentives, if you will, to make sure that we reach 30, 50, 60% of area median income for people to live right here in the city. The fact of the matter is again, we are a rapidly growing city. I have wealthy people moving here. Supply and demand dictates housing prices. So my relationship with other cities becomes critical as well, because I want people to be sheltered, preferably in Seattle, but I have to realize the economics is such that it makes it a little tough here. With the median house being $900,000 to $1 million. My wife and I have 3 children, and when I look at, and one just got married 3 weeks ago, so we're in their house hunting and thinking, wow, you have to come up with $100,000 to make a down payment here. And so you're looking at mom and dad for that. But,
congratulations.
So it's a real problem.
Yeah.
And so we get as creative as possible. We talk about the terms called apartments or micro units. We relaxed our standards for detached dwelling units, DADUs, ADUs, attached, detached, to look at single-family zoning, building more. So we're being as creative as possible to make it affordable, but we are going against supply and demand. That's just the reality of it.
What do you make of kind of citizen dissatisfaction with the country? You see it playing out as we make our way to the November presidential elections, right? We talked about the economy doing okay, although we see some softness in the labor market continuing. But what do you make of that disconnect that maybe we're not realizing some of the struggles of our citizens?
So this is what concerns me, and in the context of climate change, is that our younger generation, they understand the needs to protect our planet. They are getting dissatisfied when they see potential leaders that they somewhat feel like there's a disconnect. And I've won 4 elections in this city. I know how to debate. And one thing I never do, I never just denigrate my opponent. I just figure they're applying for the same job I'm applying for. This is what I have to offer. They have another brand, that's fine. But what you're seeing is this debate that I think, and I'm not even taking sides, I think that it's such a turnoff for the younger generation, like, forget those 2 guys, I'm gonna disengage. That will hurt our country. What I want to see is one person says, you know what, I respect your opinion, but this is what I'm gonna do for this country. And we're losing that. So leaders like myself, elected leaders, we have to be louder than that radioactivity that we see. The younger generation being so turned off. I talked to all 3 of our kids about this, that scares me.
We only have 30 seconds left, but we got to get you to weigh in on the presidential election, because there are 2 men who have a lot of so-called double haters.
Yeah.
Does
double haters?
Double haters don't like
either candidate.
Potential voters who don't like.
I haven't heard that double hater.
Yeah, it's what the pollsters are talking about right now. Does President Biden need to step aside to make room for another candidate?
So I'm not going to opine on that right now. I'm supporting Biden. I'm a Democrat. That's just I'll wear that. I've developed somewhat of a relationship with him, so I'm not calling on him to step aside. He had an awful debate, by his own mission, but I listened to him speak the other day, and he was just as punchy as ever. And so I'm not calling. I know a lot of people are doing that right now, and I respect everyone's opinion. So, but I'm not on that bandwagon, especially this late in the game, by the way. So I'll just sort of leave it at that. My biggest concern, again, is the younger generation, the double haters, as you describe it. So.
Well, and you wonder about the younger generation. Maybe they're looking for a younger candidate, right, to vote for, going forward. So.
Well, since I'm not part of that generation, I won't speak for them.
I'm driving in my car, I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no.
Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, we're just about 18 minutes away from the close on this Thursday. As you heard from Charlie Pellet back in New York, we've got a bit of a rotation underway. Investors moving out of some of those big cap names, kind of some jockeying for position, if you will, off of that weaker, softer inflation print, and so maybe not as much interest in some of the big cap names that have been on a run.
It's funny because traditionally when you see a drop in yields like we're seeing today, but now big tech is considered a safe haven. So with that drop in yields, they're moving into small caps. The Russell 2000 having its best day so far this year. Riskier, yeah.
Which is interesting.
Wow.
All right, so let's see what Melissa
What a
Otto.
world.
I know, exactly.
What a world.
All it takes is 24 hours for the shift. Melissa Otto is with us. She is TMT Analyst at S&P Global Visible Alpha, and she joins us from New York City. Melissa, interesting day, a big inflation print, certainly our focal point. What's your explanation of the trade and what's going on right now?
Hi, thank you. The CPI data was encouraging, and what it did was put the potential for a September rate cut back on the table, which is essentially a catalyst for what you're seeing in terms of that rotation from large cap into small cap, particularly for the tech sector.
It's wild to be calling, mega cap tech this idea of a safe haven. Traditionally when when you see rates fall, it's good for tech companies. That's traditionally how it's been. How do you explain the rotation today?
It's, I think coming into this earnings season, companies, particularly in the tech sector, that have performed very well in the first half, who've seen their valuations start to look either fully valued or a little bit stretched, are going to have to beat expectations, not just in the quarter, but in terms of their guidance, in order to maintain the momentum in their stock prices. If they don't, there may be some volatility ahead.
What's interesting too, and I wonder, Melissa, if we get to the point that if things are slowing down and the Fed says it's okay or getting closer to cutting rates, at some point do we start to think, oh wait, we're slowing down, slower growth, that might show its way in terms of earnings. We could see more people maybe out of work. And so we have to think about the slower growth story as well. Is that part of it?
We'll see what the jobs look like tomorrow. I think what we've seen so far is that the Fed's done a decent job of maintaining a relatively good balance between the jobs numbers and getting inflation to move on a downward trajectory. So, we'll see. I think step by step.
Melissa, you mentioned the first half of the year. Double-digit gains for the S&P 500 and for the NASDAQ. We're at more than 30 records for the S&P 500 so far this year. What does the second half look like?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right? That's the thing that I'm going to be laser focused on this earnings season is I can't wait to hear what a lot of these mega cap companies are going to guide to, what sort of commentary they're going to make, how the outlook may or may not shift. Currently, expectations are looking pretty robust for the second half. We'll see, what sort of guidance the companies give that will enable there to be a sustainability of that or some upside to that. But if not, we could be in for some volatility.
Yeah, it is interesting. The VIX, we've talked about it being low. I haven't looked at the VIX yet today, but it's certainly we've seen it low historically. When there's a lot of complacency, it makes me a little nervous. What are the biggest risks at this point? Is it the earnings fundamentals? Is it politics? Or is it just that we've had such a run up in stocks already this year that we need to kind of settle down a little bit? What are the biggest risks in your view?
I think from my perspective, it's missing expectations. So companies that come in, even if they fundamentally deliver a decent quarter and guidance, if it is below what the market has priced in, they could be punished for that. And we started to see indications of it last quarter where, especially some of these smaller, lesser known companies, we were seeing that. And I think, if we start to see that happening in the large and mega cap stocks, that might be a signal.
Well, it's interesting. A Bloomberg gauge of the Magnificent Seven mega caps headed toward the biggest loss since July of 2023. An equal weighted version of the S&P 500. So NVIDIA may be carrying the same heft as like a Dollar Tree.
Yeah.
It actually jumped. So it's a little perspective.
So the rotation out of big tech, we're starting. Is that good news to you that we're starting to see the rally broaden out a little bit?
It'll be interesting. I'm excited for this earnings season to kick off with Netflix. And Netflix will set the tone for the rest of the big mega caps. When I look at the numbers, S&P Global Visible Alpha consensus is looking for $38.8 billion in revenues at a 25% margin. Let's see what Netflix comes out with, what sort of commentary they give around the outlook, what their ad-supported business is going to do, and how they are thinking about that margin for the rest of the year. I think that'll be a really critical data point.
Hey, Melissa, how are you thinking about politics and political risk? You mentioned that it's certainly something that's on your radar, but how are you thinking about it second half of the year?
Markets are terrible at discounting for political risk, so I'm not really sure. I think basically what I think most investors try to do is just focus on the numbers and see where the upside is, especially relative to expectations.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Melissa, thank you so much. Really appreciate your input today. Melissa Otto, she is TMT Analyst and joining us, of course, on Zoom in New York City. Great to check in with her. She is TMT Analyst at S&P Global Visible Alpha. I just want to get that correctly.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.